Hello everyone, I would like to show you my newest tool, which is UV Mapper. It is a GeoNodes based modifier for real-time unwrapping. It allows us to adjust the mapping in the 3D viewport with the use of gizmos. So as you can see, I can adjust the placement of the final UV map, also the rotation, and similarly here with the cylindrical mapping, I can adjust it in the 3D viewport. And over here on the side, I have this demo teapot, and you can see we have some different types of mapping. So we have the box mapping, the planar, cylindrical cup, and finally spherical. And also I used UV Mapper for some parts of this interior, like the floor or the walls. So you can see I can easily adjust the placement of the final texture in the scene. So this tool in general is designed for models that are using tileable textures, probably in visualization and such, so the final mesh can be shared easily across multiple softwares, which would be an advantage over the shader approach to texturing. And that will be it for the intro part of this video, and now let's actually start from the beginning. So over here I have the zip file. And to install this tool, it is an asset library, so we need to unpack this zip file. And over here you'll find this folder inside. We have the blend file, catalog file, and also readme. So right now I will follow the instructions from the readme file. So what we have to do is to copy the directory, and now we go into the edit, preferences, file paths, and over here I will add the path to this folder. Remember that we are pointing to the folder, not the blend file itself. And now the asset library is added. So over here I have the assets workspace, and we can see them over there, but we can also change just the window in the layout workspace. And if we choose the UV Mapper, we can see those assets ready to be used. So we just drag and drop it into the scene, and now we can find UV Mapper in the Modifier tab, where we can choose different mapping types. We can preview the seams. We can make those seams also slightly bigger, like so. And there in the viewport, we can see the empty for the mapping and the gizmos. And the one final note would be just to remember, set the import method to append and reuse. Alright, and now that we know how to set up the UV Mapper, let's get back to our main scene and let's take a closer look at some of the features. So first let's turn on the seams preview. Let's change the look to material preview, and just to reiterate, remember that you can change those values both with the sliders in the modifier and with the gizmos in the 3D viewport. So let's now look at the first special feature of the UV Mapper, which is the mapping range. If we choose the gizmo option, we have this yellow gizmo over here, with which we change the area of influence for the cylindrical mapping or the cup mapping in the case of cylindrical cup. And on the other hand, if we choose the automatic option, the mapping range will change automatically once we change the scale of the mapping itself. So the advantage of using the gizmo method would be that once we set the mapping range, we can then change the mapping itself, and it will not affect the mapping range. So as you can see, we can adjust the mapping scale freely. Alright, and now let's go back actually to the teapot model, and let's also see the mapping range when we choose the box mapping. So you can see similarly we can adjust the area of influence for each side of the mapping with the use of those gizmos or with the slider in the modifier tab. Alright, and now we can go back to a more real life situation. So we have this table over here, and you can see that the direction of texture for the legs is okay, but for the sides we would like it to be horizontal, and for this we will use this use selection option. So first of all, I will select the mesh for the legs, and I will create a vertex group for it. So we go into the mesh data, we create a new group, and we assign the selected vertices. And now we can go back to modifier, and if we choose use selection, We can now find it in the drop-down list, and now you can see the mapping applied to those legs. So now we duplicate the modifier, and over here we can actually use the handy invert selection option. And now for the sides, let's change the alignment to the Z alignment actually, which works best. And only if we look closely, the orientation of the top faces is not correct, and we can fix that with the top-bottom orientation. Alright, and now moving on, there is this next feature that is the fit checkbox. So especially in a case like this, you can see that the origin of this mesh is actually to the side from this object. And if we apply the UV mapper, you can see that the size doesn't match the object itself and is oriented to the side. So we can fix that easily with this fit option over here. And now it matches the object perfectly. So if we adjust scale, now the mapping works properly for this tool. Alright, and now we will look at use selection, one very specific use case. Like before, when we used it, those legs were separate parts. And now we'll take a look at the situation where we want a different type of mapping for two partial loops that are right next to each other. So let's select those two polystrips. And in this case, if we were to do it the same way as before, so with the vertex group, and if we assign the selection, right now, if I duplicate this modifier and we want a different type of mapping, so let's make it planar, so it's better visible. And now, if I use selection and I pick this group that I just created, you'll see that we don't have those two separate polyloops, but a whole area. And that's because we used the vertex group selection. And for those two strips, all those vertices create this big area. And for this case, we have this special, let's call it geometry nodes operator in our asset browser that is applies face attribute. And it is important that we install it the way we did with the catalog file in the asset folder. So now it is in the face catalog and we can easily access it by hitting Ctrl F. And over here we have this operator. And now if we expand this menu over here, we can see its options. We can preview the newly created face group. Yeah, and if we just leave it as is, right now this group is created. And if we go over to the selection, now we can find it in this drop-down list over here, the newly created attribute, and we can see that the mapping is applied properly for those two polyloops separately. Alright, and next up, another real-life situation. If you were using some FBXs or some models imported from other softwares, there are two things that you need to be aware of. So let's import an FBX, and yeah, we have it over here. And now let's apply the UV mapper to it. So let's find it in the asset browser. Yeah, we just hit all. Okay, and now if we apply this, we get this debug that is saying missing UV map, named UV map, and check mesh data. So we need this name to match. So we go over to the UV map and we just need to rename it over here since this name is different. And now once it matches the name in the modifier, we can see that the debug is gone. So alright, now it should be working properly. So let's check it with the same material from the teapot. So let's copy it over here. And now we can see that it is suspicious, the tiling of this texture. If we change it to box, it's still the same. And the reason is that the imported mesh has the scale not applied, so we just go and apply. We can also apply rotation, and now you can see that the size of the texture is as it should be. And this sums up the features for UV mapper. And now for the very final part, I would like to show you some tips for using Blender to make the process of mapping even smoother. So one of the hidden options in Blender is that if we change some of those values, and now if you'd like to reset them to the default value, you can just select this slider and you hit backspace on the keyboard, and this automatically resets it to the default value. And the other tip that I have for you would be for the use case when we have a lot of modifiers in the scene. So let me actually go back to the starting point. I will first delete those modifiers, and I want to show you a situation. If I apply a modifier to the first drawer, let's change the mapping to a box, and let's actually fit it to the size of this object. And now if I copy this modifier to all the other drawers, you will see that we will get all those empties for each of the object, and they may clutter the view. So in that case, if we wanted to uncheck the preview of those empties, we would have to click it one by one, which would be a tedious task. So just remember that you can select all of those objects, and if they share the same modifier, if you alt-click any of those settings, it will change for all the other objects. And same goes for the preview of the seams. Alright, and one final note would be just remember that you can also slide across multiple sliders, and then you can adjust those values simultaneously. And also one last thing I almost forgot. Remember that by default the transform orientation is set to global, so you may find it a bit confusing that when you are rotating the gizmo it stays in place, so just remember to set it to local so it will behave properly. And I believe those tips combined with the UV mapper will make for a very neat workflow for mapping of your scenes. So that will be it. If you are interested in this tool, it will be available on Blender Market and on Gumroad. Thank you for watching.